This presentation is about Bessie Coleman, who is pictured here. We explain how this woman, born one of 13 children into an impoverished black family in Texas in 1892, went on to become the first African American woman to fly a plane and to hold a pilot's license. She had boundless courage and performed acrobatic piloting and parachuting. She was a passenger in a plane which crashed in 1926, taking her life prematurely. However, she had a lasting impact on aviation. She was born in Texas in 1892. Her mother was a domestic and had a laundry business and was likely a slave prior to the Civil War. Her father was of mixed race, African American with Native American, and worked as a day laborer. Once she was school age, Bessie walked 4 miles to her one-room segregated schoolhouse. At times, picking cotton took priority over school. The father abandoned the family in 1901. Bessie was an exceptional student in mathematics and an enthusiastic reader. She became the family accountant. In 1910, she enrolled at the Colored Agricultural and Normal University in Langston, Oklahoma. She had to drop out when she ran out of money. In 1915, she moved to Chicago. She did a beautician's trade apprenticeship and became a manicurist. World War I was between 1914 and 1918. Her brothers Walter and John were sent to France as part of a segregated National Guard regiment. When the brothers returned, they teased Bessie about how much better the Europeans were toward black people, and also how much freedom women in Europe enjoyed. Some women were even becoming pilots. Bessie had already been reading about aviation, and these stories inspired her to pursue this as a career, and she was not to be deterred. There was some context to the times, i.e., many challenges. The Civil War ended in 1865, and subsequently Reconstruction was carried out for the next 12 years. This involved reintegration of the southern states into the Union and determination of the legal status of liberated former slaves. There was a time of rapid progress with constitutional amendments ending slavery, providing equal protection under the law, and expanding the right to vote. African Americans were able to start businesses and participate in politics. There was resentment and resistance from whites, leading to a counter reaction to all of this progress. Segregation was mainly in the South, but then legalized by Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision in 1896. Subsequently, segregation permeated the fabric of the United States society. This resentment evolved toward violence with no protection from law enforcement. The Ku Klux Klan was rekindled. This was an anti-black, anti-Catholic, and anti-Jewish organization. Rebirth of a Nation was a movie about the KKK, actually watched by President Woodrow Wilson. This lionized the KKK and was demeaning to black people because of its dehumanizing portrayals. Lynching was a form of terrorism against black people, primarily in the South. Hundreds were performed per year from 1882 until 1901, after which there was a gradual drop-off. Black businesses and their owners, operating separately from whites due to segregation, were brutally attacked. During the Red Summer of 1919 through 1921, white versus black tension erupted. This was a time when white supremacists terrorized and attacked black townships with hundreds killed. Elsewhere, there were race riots. The violence was fueled by tensions developing after soldiers of both races returned from World War I. The pattern of violence was more intense in the South and stimulated the mass migration of African Americans to the North, which created job competition, further exacerbating the tensions everywhere. Bessie could not find instructors for piloting in the U.S. And whether this was because she was a woman or black or both is difficult to determine. She learned French and journeyed to France in 1920. She learned to fly in the French Nieuport Type 82 biplane at École d'Aviation des Frères Caudron at Le Crotoy in Le Somme. This was France's most famous flight school. She completed training after 7 months, receiving her Fédération Aéronautique Internationale license June of 1921. She was 29 years old and the only woman out of 62 candidates. She spent additional time training with a World War I French flying ace who had reportedly shot down 31 planes during World War I. Bessie returned to the U.S. in September of 1921 and was met in New York by reporters black and white. She proclaimed a desire to form a flight school accessible to African Americans and went on to do air shows. These were with flamboyance and flair. She did aviation acrobatics and parachuting. She was supported by rich black benefactors. It was impossible to avoid segregated audiences, but she would not fly unless the entrance to the air show was unrestricted by race. She realized she would need to enhance her skills to draw bigger audiences, and she returned to Europe in February of 1922 for this purpose. She went to Paris first and spent 2 months in advanced training, again in the Nieuport biplane. She then called on Anthony Fokker, a famous Dutch airplane manufacturer. He is pictured here. He built planes for Germany during World War I, but moved his company to Holland after the war so he could continue to build planes. Fokker invited her to visit his plant and to fly some of his planes. In May of 1922, she went to Germany, where she stayed 10 weeks, making friends in the aviation circles, including Robert Thielen, a pilot and aviation designer who taught her how to fly the LFG Roland. There was talk of a delivery of some of these airplanes to the U.S. for an aviation school, but this never transpired. She also flew over the Kaiser's Palace in Potsdam. She appears to have received a letter from Alfred Keller, a World War I pilot and member of the Deutsche Luftreederei. This was an air traffic control organization. He praised her unusual skill during 50 flights she made over Berlin in a twin-engine 220 horsepower German plane. Keller later was involved in the clandestine buildup of the German Air Force prior to World War II, and he was also a general under Goering during that war. Bessie returned to New York in August of 1922, again encountering the waiting press corps. Over the next few years, Bessie began doing barnstorming air shows with impressive feats of acrobatic aviation, drawing thousands. She was known as Queen Bess, the daredevil aviatrix. She was undeterred by the almost daily reports of fatal plane accidents. David Binky, a white businessman and aviation enthusiast who is pictured here, supported her with planes, fueling, and repair services. She battled on two fronts: defense of equal rights for blacks in a white-dominated society, and battling for equal rights for women in a male-dominated black society. A black newspaper, the Amsterdam News, published an editorial titled, "Colored Women Venturing Too Far from Children, Kitchen, Clothes, and the Church." Bessie finally purchased a plane, a Curtiss JN-4. In February of 1923, she was to fly from Santa Monica 25 miles to Palomar Park in this plane for an air show in front of 10,000 fans. Her plane crashed on takeoff after a motor stall at 300 feet. Similar crashes in these planes had occurred in the previous 16 days, killing 5 pilots. She survived, but was knocked unconscious and had severe injuries, including a fractured leg and fractured ribs. Recovery took 3 months in the hospital. Her first air show after the crash was in September of 1923 in front of 10,000 people. By this time, she had changed managers 5 times in 28 months, and by spring of 1924, she was having difficulty getting her shows scheduled and arranged. She was a celebrity and did multiple speaking arrangements describing her accomplishments and experiences. and encouraging African Americans to be interested in flying. She did a series of well-attended air shows in Texas beginning on Juneteenth, 1925, and she subsequently traveled the country doing additional speaking engagements until she ultimately landed in Florida. This is a picture of the Jenny, or Curtiss JN-4, with the OX-5 engine, and Bessie is pictured on the plane. Beeman Chewing Gum Air, Edwin M. Beeman became a benefactor for Bessie, and this helped Bessie buy this Curtiss Jenny from Love Field in Dallas. It was flown with difficulty from Dallas to Jacksonville by William Wills, a mechanic. There were several forced landings on the way. In preparation for an air show in Jacksonville, Florida, Bessie went up in this plane with Wills as pilot in April of 1926. She was scouting jump sites and was not wearing a seatbelt. Wills was cruising at 80 miles per hour, but the plane suddenly accelerated and then nosedived. There was a tailspin at 1,000 feet. The plane flipped upside down at 500 feet, and Bessie fell out. She died from the fall. Wills crashed and died with the plane. The crash was due to a wrench that had slid into the control gears. Funeral services were attended by thousands in Florida. The body was transported by casket to Chicago, where 10,000 filed past the coffin at the Southside Funeral Home. She is buried in Lincoln Cemetery on Kinsey Avenue in Blue Island, Illinois. Quotes from Bessie include, "The air is the only place free from prejudice. You've never lived until you've flown. The higher you fly, the better the chance you have in case of an accident. We, African Americans, must have aviators if we are to keep up with the times. The only time you have a problem is when you stop trying." Bessie Coleman's legacy includes the first all-black aviation organization in the U.S. was named the Bessie Coleman Aero Club and founded in 1929 in Los Angeles. There were additional clubs named after her, and Chicago Mayor Daley issued a proclamation in April of 1992 urging cognizance of the accomplishments of Bessie Coleman. The daughter of Charles Lindbergh, Reeve Lindbergh, wrote a poem about Bessie in 1996. "Nobody Owns the Sky," the story of brave Bessie Coleman, to honor her memory. Bessie was one of 5 women highlighted in the 2023 quarter dollars. Several streets have been named after her, both in the U.S. and in France and Germany. Rue Bessie Coleman is in the 20th arrondissement of Paris, and Bessie Coleman Strasse 11 in Frankfurt am Main in the Gateway Gardens district at Frankfurt Airport is accompanied by a large poster of her. Thank you very much, and this is the bibliography.